Okay, I think we will begin. Good afternoon and good evening, to depending on where you are. Welcome to the ATRF Public Transport Research Committee's first webinar for the year on a gender perspective to public transport. What an important topic. My name is Subhay Chowdhury. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland. I teach transport planning, and this topic is very close to my heart. I will be your host for the webinar. Just so you know, the webinar is being recorded, and throughout the webinar, feel free to ask any questions you have in the webinar chat box. We will be answering all questions at the end of the presentation. So we have three presentations, and we'll answer all questions at the end. So the objective of this webinar is really to bring more attention to gender perspective of public transport experiences and the journeys that women and gender diverse and LGBT communities face in terms of barriers when using public transport. We have three wonderful panelists. The first presenter we have is Dr. Rumana Sarkar. So Dr. Sarkar is a postdoctoral fellow at Monash University. Her presentation will focus on the impact of experiencing harassment during youth, so adolescent years, on perceived safety and adoption of precautionary measures as a result. Our second speaker is Kirsten Tellerman. She's a doctoral student at the University of Auckland with me. Kirsten's presentation will focus on LGBTQI plus riders, their perception of safety, and she will also share some findings from literature which are really directed towards this community. She will also share some discussions of findings from her work as well. We look forward to that as well. And lastly, we have Alicia Truss, all the way from San Francisco. She's the Chief Communication Officer at San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit. Alicia brings a wealth of experience on how practitioners actually deploy these strategies and ensure that public transport is safe for the youth, particularly for the youth, for women, and also for gender diverse. So with that, I'd like to pass the floor on to Rumana for our first presentation.
Thank you, Subhay, for the introduction. I'll now share my screen with you. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Rumana Sarkar, currently working at the Public Transport Research Group. Today I'm going to present about the personal safety and security for women public transport users in Melbourne. This research was conducted by us, me and Professor Graham Curry at the Public Transport Research Group in Monash University, and it was also funded by the Monash University internal grant. When we think about personal safety, we define it as a fear of crime or antisocial behavior. And personal safety has been always a major concern for women riders worldwide. And research have shown that globally up to almost all the women have faced some type of sexual or unwanted behavior on public transport. In terms of Australia, 1 in 4 women, they personally feel less safe when traveling with public transport at night. Particularly in Victoria, the Victorian Department of Transport has also identified personal safety in their strategic research area priority theme. That's why we are researching how women in Melbourne experience personal safety, what's their perception when they're using a public transport, not only their experience, but also how this harassment experience actually shaped their long-term travel behavior. So moving on to the survey approach, we have conducted a panel-based online survey in Melbourne last year in 2024. So we expected to get around 500 women rail users sample along with gender diverse rail users who are over 18 years old and residing in Melbourne. By rail users, we defined it as metro train users mostly, But for this presentation, I am only going to focus on the women rail users, that is 528 samples. So moving on to the survey results. Before going to the survey results, I would like to show you the conceptual framework that we have used to design the questionnaire. So here we have defined coping behavior as perceived precautionary safety on transit. And we have hypothesized that perceived precautionary safety, or PPS, is directly related to the previous harassment experience. As due to the ethical issues, we couldn't include samples from, under 18 years old who are in their teenage years. So we asked respondents about their experience in adolescence years as well. And we also hypothesized that when you're experiencing harassment in adolescence, that may have also impacted your coping behavior in adulthood. We have also postulated that harassment experience not only relates to coping behavior, but it also changes the individual's trait and state anxiety level, and it indirectly affects coping behavior. In addition, we have also analyzed different social demographic variables such as age, use of mode, rail use frequency, etc., to understand the findings. So as we have used structural equation modeling to estimate this model, our latent variable is perceived personal safety on transit. And how did we measure that? We used 6 different items, including both coping behavior and non-coping behaviors. And we asked participants to agree or disagree to these statements based on a Likert scale. And what we have found that generally women riders in Melbourne, they feel safer on rail when they take this precautionary behavior, such as I feel safer traveling during the day when I take extra measures, that is being hyper vigilant, taking alternative routes. I only feel personally safe during the day when traveling with metro trains, and I usually avoid traveling after dark. So here we can see that they adopt this coping behavior to feel safe. Now, looking at their harassment experience in the last 12 months, we can see that intimidating stares dominate women harassment experience. While staring can look like an innocent act or not so intrusive act, but it can also be aggressive and can make women feel uncomfortable when riding with train. What was intriguing that 1 in 25 women users self-reported that they had direct or explicit sex pressure when traveling with rail in the last 12 months, which was really shocking when we looked at the result for us as well. We also asked about a serious physical assault, and what we found that most of them, they don't experience serious harassment, but at least 16% have experienced physical assault on public transport and were hospitalized at least once. That means 1 in 6 women have experienced physical assault in the last 12 months, which paints a stark picture of current personal safety perception in Melbourne. Now, as mentioned earlier, we couldn't include girls in our sample, but we asked about the harassment experience in teenage years. And here you can see that nearly half of the respondents have experienced harassment when they were in their teenage years. Stares and catcalls dominates this experience, as well as seductive behavior, remarks, or comments. If we look at the physical assault, a high majority had no serious assault when they were under 18, but 5% women riders experienced hospitalization from physical assault with a weapon. One can say that these are maybe rare occasions. This doesn't happen frequently, but from my personal experience, I'm a public transport user. I use it frequently, and I have experienced also harassment in public transport twice here in Melbourne in last 1 year. But at this age, when you're under 18, this type of serious assault, this experience can actually leave a lasting impact on your travel behavior on the life course. So that's why we try to understand the mental state of these respondents, but from a general point of view. So we asked respondents, in your daily life, how do you generally feel using the STI scale that I have mentioned earlier in the conceptual framework? And what we have found that usually the respondents, they feel secure most often, but some of them, they also feel tense frequently, that is nearly 40%, and another 37% worry over possible misfortune. So here we wanted to see if the individual personality trait has somehow changed due to the triggering effect of past harassment in our model. We also asked about the impact of harassment experience on the rail use, and nearly half of the respondents, they said that past harassment on PT, on public transport, has affected their rail use somehow, and of this, 24% women travel significantly less now. Now, moving forward to the model results, here we can see clearly that harassment experiences are the strongest predictor of perceived precautionary personal safety or coping behavior. What we can see from the model that those who have experienced verbal harassments, they're likely to feel more safer when they're adopting the coping behavior. But those who have experienced physical assault, they don't feel safer in public transport environment, even though they are taking coping measures. If you look at the intimidation experience in teenage years, the relationship is also negative. That means even if you're taking precautions, you are not feeling safe when you had harassment experience in your adolescence. If we look at the mental well-being, we can see that women who have experienced verbal harassments are more likely to exhibit anxiety-related traits. On the other hand, women who have experienced physical assault, they have exhibited both anxious and secure attachment or trait. However, it has a stronger relationship with the anxiety trait. Now, if we look at the use of public transport mode, all public transport mode users have a negative impact on public transport. They are less likely to feel safe when they are taking coping behavior. But for particularly tram users, it is less likely that they feel safe even with the coping measures. Also, people who uses public transport after dark, women, they feel less safe when they're using public transport even with coping measures. Finally, women from culturally and linguistically diverse background, they also reported lower level of perceived safety, even with the coping behavior. So this model definitely shows that types of harassment plays an important role in the coping behavior. And if we want to conclude, this study offers a new insight into the factors that shapes women's perceived precautionary safety on transit. So coping behavior is good. It's good to make you more safe, but it is also a burden to women. So every time they go out, they have to think about different coping measures. They have to proactively take those measures. And this finding highlights the need for policy intervention that operators can also help them in this matter. That includes trauma-informed and intersectional approaches for the personal safety on transit. So what we recommend that launching awareness campaigns in schools for young transit users to mitigate the impact of those negative incidents in their life in the later adulthood. We are also recommending to enhance after dark travel safety, which has been researched quite a lot, but just only improving lighting and visibility might not be the case. You should also include proactive staff at the tram stop and rail station. So instead of replacing them with the technological guardianship, having police officers or protective service officers would be helpful. We have to also move beyond the infrastructure. So by implementing bystander intervention, launching campaigns, and also training the staffs with the gender sensitive toolkit that has been launched recently in Melbourne, that could be also helpful. And in the end, we should also include women riders to design the public transport environment. Usually, the policies are unidirectional. It is given from the operators, but we also need to include the users to understand their need so that we can hear their need and we can act upon it. Another finding that this study shows that most of the studies have not included mental well-being in this area. Post-traumatic stress disorder has been studied in medical science and in other fields, but not in the context of public transport. So we have, our model showed that there is a relationship of mental well-being with the harassment experiences and coping behavior. So this could also give a new direction for the policy intervention. So, so that's it. That's my presentation. If you want to know more about our research, please do contact with us. Here is our email address. And I am looking forward to your question in the end of this webinar. But now I am giving this floor to Kristen.
Well, thanks, Romana. All right, I'm going to trust that folks can see it, and I'll be notified if my presentation's not showing. But kia ora koutou. I'm Kirsten, a PhD candidate at Waipapa Tōmataro, the University of Auckland. And in the 10 years leading up to starting my PhD, I worked as a specialist with WSP to partner with public transport providers across the United States to enhance their safety and security of their systems. And my PhD is focused on collecting intersectional identity-based data that captures the experiences of folks most vulnerable to gender-based harassment and also LGBTQI-directed violence while using public transport. And I have an emphasis on harassment and active bystander programs in my research. And I'm sharing this background because it provides context for my approach to research. My goal is to inform better design and procedural strategies for PT providers, public transport providers, to make their systems safer and accessible for everyone. So real-world application is my research touchstone. So when thinking about what to highlight for this webinar, I decided to focus on key practice-ready takeaways for both researchers and practitioners from existing literature on LGBTQI personal security and public transport. I felt that this would provide the greatest benefit for webinar attendees. And the information comes from the subsequent that I will explain in the subsequent slides. It comes from a soon-to-be published systematic literature review that's currently in final production with Transport Reviews. So if you scan the QR code on the screen and connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll be posting that on there when it's available, because I can only cover a tiny amount of that information today. And the paper has a wealth of information and also a lot of handy summary graphics and tables for quick reference. So enough of that. Let's dig in. Trying to access my, there we go. So just addressing why LGBTQI out of anything. Research increasingly shows that compared to men, women are more frequent targets of violence on public transport, and especially sexual violence. Romana covered that. We understand this. But it's also important to note that gender-based violence isn't limited to cishet women, and that is women whose gender aligns with what they were assigned at birth, that's the cis part, and are heterosexual, so the het part of cishet. So the LGBTQI community, which for ease of speaking, I'll probably call the rainbow community or the queer community, interchangeable, but it's all, I'm referring to the same community. And we also experience elevated rates of gender-based violence while using public transport, in addition to violence that's driven by other drivers like homophobia, transphobia, gender policing, and rigid binaries like man, woman, femme, masc, gay, straight. So when research is only collecting binary data representative of cishet women, and when practice only designs strategies based on these limited data, our information and decisions don't necessarily meet the security needs of our PT users who exist outside these often unacknowledged cishet normativity of typical data collection and strategy implementation efforts. So as researchers and practitioners, we have the opportunity to do better because no one deserves violence like harassment. And in many cases, there's a lot of overlap between coping mechanisms, again, like what we heard from Brahmana, from cishet women and the LGBTQ community. And that helps strengthen justification for implementing recommendations that come out of those types of studies. And then also in some cases, strategies designed for cishet women can unintentionally increase the risk of violence against LGBTQ folks. And in other times, in sometimes overlapping cases, the experiences of LGBTQI folks can consider intersectional impacts and needs, and these can provide insights that shine light on some blind spots and other opportunity for designing systems that are safer and more secure for people of all identities and needs. So the rest of my slides will highlight some of these key practice-ready takeaways that are informed by research regarding cishet women and the LGBTQI community. So quick note about applicability, the key takeaways, they are all based on the systematic literature review that included 51 research papers, one of which is mine and Sube's on bystander intervention. And this note is just about how most of these studies came from countries, which are all shaded on the map, that have generally higher LGBTQI equality and higher income. Because it typically takes a certain degree of baseline economic and physical security for society's gap to narrow between the rights and protections of dominant identities and those of marginalized identities. So countries in violent conflict, for example, are unlikely to be able to prioritize reducing harassment of women and LGBTQI people when more severe violence is an everyday occurrence. So this is just to kind of say, as always, findings need to be assessed for application and attuned to the local and cultural context. And a little bit more context of the papers that are included in here, the overwhelming majority of the 51 publications were published within the last 5 years, where with approximately an even split between studies that used interviews and questionnaire surveys, and then followed by mixed method studies and literature reviews. So first, I'm just going to go into some coping mechanisms that are actually shared by cishet women and queer folks, and they help contextualize strategy recommendations that are the core of what I'll talk about. And there's these little progress pride flags that highlight additional considerations that LGBTQI folks might take. So first, in places where violence is anticipated, riders may modify spatial behaviors to minimize wait times, avoid certain times of days, routes, people, places, anything like that that might increase risk of exposure to violence. And for queer folks, being visibly queer can intensify vulnerability and exposure, and strategies that might be directed at like women-only buses or spaces. These can exclude LGBTQI riders who also have vulnerability to harassment and other forms of violence. Also, lighting is a commonly cited concern for riders of all identities, but lighting can also facilitate excessive surveillance by making marginalized people more visible. So it needs to be implemented in conjunction with other strategies. And then finally, cishet women and LGBTQ folks can also act confident and make physical changes like wearing large jackets to help deflect unwanted attention. And for queer folks, this can include having to hide their authentic queer identities and their like literal voices in some cases. And then cishet women and LGBTQI folks may only use public transport when others are present, who can act as potential bystanders to increase real and perceived security. However, for LGBTQI folks, they might not receive support from others or even be blamed as a source of the problem. And if it's bad enough, people may avoid public transport altogether. However, that usually requires access to a personal vehicle, the ability to pay for rideshare or taxi, or the proximity and physical ability to bike or walk. And LGBTQI folks can face additional economic barriers that might make accessing those alternatives not an option. So the summary of these is that while there we go, is that while cishet women and LGBTQI folks are subject to similar types of safety work, queer folks often have additional burdens and trade-offs to navigate. So on to those recommended strategies. I'm going to highlight one recommendation from each category that's available in the literature review. And the table on the right side indicates the type of strategy and what points of violence it can impact. So like, is it preventative? Would it occur as something's happening? Would it happen afterwards? That sort of thing. So first, policies supported by training are required to lay a foundation for systemic change. And in order to make well-informed, data-driven decisions, we need intersectional data inclusive of queer folks and other marginalized communities. Because people's identities like gender and LGBTQI impact our risk of violence while riding public transport. And these differing experiences can be masked when data aren't disaggregated by marginalized demographics. So we need policies that require inclusive data collection and analysis to inform strategies like staff and frontline employees, training and education that supports a welcoming community for a diverse ridership. We also can't overlook the importance of just baseline good public transport. When services are unreliable, they force long wait times and transfer times and don't go where people need to go, riders can face increased risk of violence from extended exposure and from other riders becoming disgruntled in reaction to issues with service quality. So, with all of this, the typical peak hours that public transport models are often based around, it's based off your typical like 9 to 5 commuter who was overwhelmingly male, living in suburbs while working in city centers. So when we have more representative data on travel behavior of women and queer folks and other marginalized populations, that means we can improve service quality while responding to travel patterns and needs of marginalized communities. So that might look like accounting for LGBTQI neighborhoods and events in our service planning. On the design side of things, it's well understood that improving a public transport network's lighting, natural surveillance, and maintenance can signal an area is cared for and facilitate increased social control. And it's important to identify and prioritize vulnerable areas of the network using input from marginalized riders who often face excessive surveillance, because they might provide insight for approaches to environmental design and activation that doesn't sacrifice the safety of marginalized communities for the comfort of dominant identities. And a frequent request from public transport riders is more security staff for increased patrolling onboard vehicles and at stations. And this can be effective, and it also warrants exercising cautions due to a lot of history around the world of disproportionate targeting and violence by police against LGBTQI and other marginalized communities. So one option is would be looking at implementing response procedures that leverage non-policing crisis intervention teams and community support organizations. And then with any strategy, public-facing communication is super key for successful implementation. These strategies need to demonstrate inclusion and protection of LGBTQI and other marginalized riders, like literally as in visually reflect these communities in outreach and education materials and programs. So that might look like establishing a program for active bystander education and support that celebrates diversity of ridership and with signage that communicates passengers, including LGBTQI, deserve to ride free of harassment. And finally, no matter how much we do, we unfortunately do live in a world where violence happens. And until we can make transformative systemic change and cultural shifts, we also need to prepare for when violence does occur. An appropriate response can help reduce harm for victim survivors. And we do this by implementing response efforts that avoid victim blaming, they educate staff about violence, and provide equal treatment and legal redress. So that includes increasing the visibility and understanding of LGBTQI-directed violence and ensuring representation in legislation and policy and practice. Because LGBTQI and other marginalized riders need to know that they are included in the protections and won't be turned away or blamed. So in summary, when our data collection and analysis are more representative of the most marginalized communities, we can move beyond data binaries to better understand rider experience and support more representative decision-making and strategies, all of which can ultimately help increase ridership because people feel safe using public transport. So namahi nui, thank you so much for your attention. One final plug to connect on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear about what you're working on, how you might apply pieces from today's webinar to your work as a researcher or practitioner. And it's my pleasure to turn it over to Alicia, whose work ties everything we've talked about together today in a real-world example of how applying these types of data and approaches can make a meaningful difference for public transport riders and beyond.
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks for having me here. And I'm just pulling up my screen right now. There we go. All right. So it was about 5 years ago when Bart made this commitment to finally tackle harassment on our system. And it was born out of some youth participatory research that was done in the San Francisco Bay Area that Bart learned about that said that many youth in the Bay Area were experiencing high rates of harassment, not only on public transit, but on their way to it. And at the time, we had no data, no programs, just absolutely nothing that could be responsive to the group that had led this youth participatory research, the Alliance for Girls. And basically on the spot, when we learned about this research, I just knew it was this tremendous opportunity to partner with a girl-serving organization to do a safety initiative. And I say initiative because I didn't want it to look at it just as a campaign, right? Campaigns are something that you do and then you pause and then maybe there's another one and it's very looked at as public relations. I wanted something so much more holistic. And so we partnered with the Alliance for Girls and we brought on some cultural strategists, which was really key because cultural strategists helped us see everything through the lens of art. It also made sure that we didn't sound like government and that we were connecting with the lived experiences of people and that we were taking a trauma-informed approach. And we actually hired youth. It was very important to us that we pay those who helped us, not only the organizations, but the youth themselves. And they were the ones that came up with the name Not One More Girl. And I love that name. And I think it's such a great name for an initiative. And the idea was Bart was going to make a commitment to start collecting data, change policy, right? That's so important to make a bold statement up front. And then slowly but methodically start implementing changes that would create a culture of care on our system. I was very nervous about launching anything that victim blamed or that put every single action on the woman or the gender expansive person. I also didn't want an initiative that basically told people, don't do this, don't do that. If you do this, you're going to be arrested. We wanted something that was centered around non-policing solution. And again, something that made our system feel like we cared and were welcoming and that we wanted riders to look out for each other. And so the very first thing I did, and I think this is why I had so much success from the beginning, was I reached out to our board of directors and one by one, I met with them with this group that we had been planning the initiative and I got them on board. And I took a resolution to our board of directors the same day that we also decided to amend our code of conduct, to actually change policy to say we were going to prohibit sexual harassment. And this resolution was key because it basically said BART is supporting this effort financially and as an agency. And so that's how I got that buy-in, especially with all of these managers at BART who are very busy trying to implement their own projects, right? Their own infrastructure changes, their own capital programs. I put my foot in the door and I said, we're going to look at everything through the lens of safety when it comes to women and girls and gender expansive people, because then of course everyone will win when you do that. The other thing right away we started to do was expand non-policing options. And that's because the youth clearly told us that they didn't always feel comfortable around police officers. And we know many of our writers want more police officers. And it's okay to strike that balance. I never wanted to exclude anyone. This wasn't a quote unquote anti-police measure. If anything, the police were huge stakeholders for us. And there was always a negotiation with every department that I worked with. So we brought on more unarmed ambassadors as well as crisis intervention specialists. But not only that, those very initial full-time employees that we hired to be ambassadors and crisis intervention specialists, we hired youth and transitional age youth to serve on the hiring panels. How powerful is that, to show the community how much we care about their input, and they were able to ask questions of these people before we hired them. We also made sure we added new reporting tools. So we use an app that you can report a crime taking place or something that concerns you. There's also a text message. We added the category of sexual harassment to that. We had already had sexual assault and battery and those types of things, but we had not had sexual harassment because it is not against the penal code. So this really marked the first time ever BART added something to our code of conduct and to our reporting tools that was not a violation of the penal code. So that really set the stage. And then I talked to you about the cultural strategy, this idea of hiring artists and actual sexual assault victims who are now trying to create moments where we're taking a trauma-informed response. And our first phase of Not One More Girl, we decided to do these very declarative statements through posters. And you'll see here we have a mixture of gender expansive, we have trans. The representation in these visuals was extremely inclusive. And the girls that were on, that we paid, the young people that were on our working group, they came up with these slogans, and also the look and feel. They starred in the pictures that then became all of our collateral for phase one. And then phase two, we took a different approach in terms of expanding. Phase one was extremely successful. We have all the data to show it. People said that they felt safer on BART, seeing these posters, all the collateral that went with it. We did these pop-up events. Phase two, we really dug deep into bystander intervention. This art depicts actual bystander intervention tactics that you can do in terms of like pretending you know someone, sitting by them, making them leave that car and move to the first car where the train operator is. A scenario where someone sees something that's happening and decides to report it and then sits with the girl to make her feel safe, and ignoring the harasser, right? These bystander intervention tips that we know work, but we need our writers to know about them. So the second phase, that was what the art focused on. So we did record this amazing bystander intervention training video, which you can watch yourself. We've had so many people watch it on YouTube, and we put these all over our system. We made sure schools knew about it, stakeholders. We want people to watch this video and learn. And all of these events that we started to do in the community, instead of just sharing obvious safety tips, don't have your headphones on, don't have your nose buried into your phone. Those are obvious. And again, it puts everything on the woman to prevent something awful from happening. So instead, what we really started to focus on was how everyone plays a role and how to do that safely so it de-escalates instead of making something worse. Then this lovely idea, this is just something that is so beautiful. It was the youth's idea. We created these cards, bystander intervention cards. The blue cards are, you got me. That's if someone is harassing you, you can just pass it to someone in the car. And then the prompts are on there of what to do. Or the yellow ones are I got you, which means if you see someone being harassed or you're not sure of the situation, you just pass them a card and it says, not if you need help. Do you want me to stand with you? Shall I call police? And it's letting the person decide how to move. So these are available at all station agent booths. We hand them out everywhere. I am being flooded all the time with universities saying, I need more cards. I need more cards. Our station agents run out of cards because we've educated that these cards are available to you. We've also heard this great feedback that just carrying the cards makes them feel safer because they know they have something if they need it. Now, we do have a survey on the card, and not many people have taken the survey, but that's okay. But it's something that we want to make sure to measure it if someone does ever use it. And then so I want to show you how having these very proactive informational initiatives with posters everywhere, press releases, videos, announcements in our stations, media interviews, paying youth to do social media posts. We've actually seen in our data that harassment has gone down. You see here at the height, we were at 12% of our writers saying they experienced harassment in the last 6 months. And after the launch of phase 1, it dipped down to 7. It kind of creeps back up. And then phase 2, and it dipped down. And now we've been steadily at 7. The other thing we did was we implemented what's the Mineta Transportation Institute, which is a Northern California-based institute. They offered to all, really to everyone for free. It was a state legislation, a survey. And the survey does pull out that great demographics that we need to disaggregate the data. And on that, basically, here are those coping mechanisms you've already heard about all evening, that basically confirming that this is what women and non-binary people do. But super interesting was we were able to hear who feels the safest. And one of the things I am most proud of is that in the group of who felt the most safest were those who identified as LGBTQ plus. And this was 5 years into our initiative. I believe that's because we have so many visual signs and indicators and policies in our stations that show that we are very inclusive of trans, of gay, of all non-binary, of all the gender expansive people. And so we also learned that most likely to happen on a train. We sort of knew that. And we were very surprised to see that these incidents are most likely to happen during peak commute hours instead of the evening. Because we did look at the data in a way that it doesn't matter that most people ride during the peak commute. So that was just very interesting. We think it's because of just how crowded the train cars are. And so it opens the door to more things from happening between two people. And so moving forward, what we did was we brought all the youth back together again, and they recommended to us that we do a gender safety audit. And they gave us all these great indicators of how to get a baseline of this great data, and then we can just only improve from there. And it's everything from programs to promote that how you can pay for transit, or all of the different non-policing solutions we have in place, or the different Wi-Fi spots, or visual safety. That the youth told us they want to see plants and murals, and of course working lights. So I love this concept of an audit, and I really hope BART is able to get to this in our phase 3. We also listened to them and realized that most of the things they wanted were either environmental, something that got to intergenerational accessibility, very much of like making public statements and posters about inclusion and acknowledgement, and then community engagement, so important. Those pop-up events, community events, bringing people together, and all of that will lead to increased ridership. And so we've compiled all of these great ideas from the youth. Some of them are as simple as have QR codes with Spotify playlists with empowering music, or music that helps you relax on the train. That's so easy to implement. I can do that. That's something I can do immediately and really low cost. So lots of great ideas. And so what phase 3 has done is we're going to bring back the youth. We're going to bring back the Alliance for Girls. We'll develop a phase 3 posters. And then we're committing to 3 pilot programs. So maybe it's creating safe waiting areas. Or what I want to do is we have these emergency call buttons and no one seems to know about it. So we want to hire an artist to make that call button really stand out and have youth and gender expansive people see themselves in whatever art that is. And then as well as continue to have these pop-up events and art installations and awareness activations where we continue to have these really difficult conversations, but they really help, and it's building trust with our writers. So that's what phase 3 looks like. We're very excited. We're also trying to get more people at BARD involved through this gender safety working group. So it's not just a few key people in the agency, but really all of us. And so that's what phase 3 is. And now we're really excited to take your questions.
Great, wonderful. What a great set of presentations from all three of you. We've had some good questions come through in the chat box. So some of them have been answered, but I think they will be nice for the panelists to discuss the questions with the wider group. So the first one was for you, Kirsten. What do you think are the upside and the downsides of women-only provisions for LGBTQI?
Right. Yeah. I just sent a response on the question there. Well, first of all, that strategy is very context specific. Where I've seen them implemented is in some countries in Asia and in South America. And the general overarching, regardless of if they're inclusive of queer folks or not, criticism is that they're not addressing the underlying driver and the underlying reason that they might be needed in the first place. And so I would say if they are being explored to be used, they also really need to be paired with some initiatives and actions that get at the underlying thing. And maybe they're seen as a temporary stopgap to get us to the point where they're not needed anymore. Because they're forcing the change, that burden of change on women to go seek out these cars, and they're not forcing people who are initiating violence to change their behavior. And in terms of the impact on the queer community, there's some studies out there that have looked at, one was in the Philippines, where they have women-only carriages, and this study with trans women was that it ultimately there was no specific policy of inclusion or exclusion because the Philippines doesn't recognize trans women as a valid identity. And so they don't have a policy on it. So it was just left up to whoever was the station manager at that time of whether or not they were allowed on, if they were quote unquote clocked and recognized as trans. And just in general, with folks that I've talked with in my study who are trans women and non-binary folks, it's just generally seen as, the terms oh, we don't want segregation is common. And then also just, I don't know if I'd be included. And if that exists, and I'm left not able to access that carriage, then I'm left in a carriage that's even higher risk because the people that would bring safety to me are in a different carriage. So.
Good. Thank you. My next question is for Romana. So what do you think? You talked about women experiencing harassment in their youth, and there was a question about looking at different age groups, so as to when they experienced during their youth. Have you done an analysis between the age group, or is that future work?
Actually, in the model that I showed here, I didn't find any significance with age. So irrespective of age, I think the coping behavior was same for all ages. But I had a question about the reporting impact on different age. So that could be included in the future research. I think I also included reporting types because we asked the frequency of reporting incidents in our survey. I couldn't show that result due to the time limitation here, but what we have noticed that we have an emergency service, non-emergency service actually, that's called Stop It. And after the incident, you can actually call to this service. This is actually managed by Victorian Police and Metro Trains, and only 11% of the sample have used it. So you can see the degree of underreporting. And it is also in line with other researches that underreporting is an issue. And another 17%, they say that they actually don't want to use it because it's not reliable, it's not effective.
Hmm.
So I think provision of a better emergency services is really important to prevent, this type of harassment experience.
Okay, that's great. We have a number of other questions that are popping up. So give me a second to read through and filter out. Um, One question I did have for Alicia as I am working through the questions was while I was listening to your presentation about the cards, the different cards, the blue and the yellow, I wonder if because of their coloring and the act of actually passing on a card, do you think perpetrators would also recognize what this is? So do you think that might aggravate them, or was there anything around just the act of, oh, you're doing something, so I'm going to make it worse for you or something? Was there anything around that?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question. And certainly when we were talking with people about the idea of the cars before we made them, we talked about that. But so much is taking place on a public transit ride. And
Mm,
often the first instincts are for people when they're being initially harassed or bothered is to ignore them. And so we felt that a simple act of just passing something or they're looking through their bag to get it and passing, that wouldn't escalate a scenario. It's usually something where they're trying to threaten the other person or
mm,
speak down to them, that is what really escalates it. I do think that's fair, and it's certainly something that we'll watch for.
mm.
But we've now had them for more than a year, and we've only gotten positive feedback
Okay,
from them. And I
that's good.
continue
That's
to have
great.
to offer more supplies to people, so that's always a good sign.
That's great. Okay, there's a good question here that I think I would open to anyone who's interested in answering. So, have there been much research coming out showing the effectiveness of recommended interventions on reducing harassment, or is it only on perception of safety? So we've talked a lot about perception of safety. Are there actual recommended? So Alicia, I mean, you went through quite a few. Would you like to take this question? Are there any research showing like recommended interventions? So,
Yeah, I would just say that after each phase, we did do follow-up survey, random sample surveys where we disaggregated the data, and it did show that that we raise awareness of the issue. We taught people they know what to do if they see it, and they know what to do if they experience. And then we asked if they felt safer knowing all this, and they confirmed that. And then I think overall, just that one question, have you experienced harassment, and seeing it go down after each phase does give me the confidence that these approaches are working, and that we are heading in the right direction. And so it's not all, some of this data isn't all perception, that it is that these types of interventions, I believe, and having a healthy mix of them, policing and non-policing, reporting, educational policy changes are helping.
wonderful. Thank you. I'd like to direct this question to Kirsten. So this question is related to the fact that we are talking about public transport, but these are social issues and they happen in other places. So do you have any suggestions as how to create relationships with the wider community and how to actually measure effectiveness of these relationships?
Right. I mean, that's getting at that cultural change thing. And I mean, I think Alicia's examples are a really good example of this because it came from the community was the project and your partnership with organizations there. In terms of building relationships with the wider community, I mean, I would just say meeting people where they are a big thing. It's for many folks, especially if we're talking about people who might be considered vulnerable or are marginalized, the going to like an authority place can be really intimidating and just like a deal breaker. So going and just meeting people where they are, using existing networks. There's going to be community-based grassroots organizations that already have these networks. So if you can build relationships and trust with these organizations, you can have this ongoing partnership with them for any sort of initiative or communication or outreach that you're looking for. But yeah, and starting early as well, and not overlooking just basic good relationship building.
Excellent.
Alicia, anything specific
Yeah.
from your experience that you'd
So
add?
the meeting people where they're at, our pop-ups were not at our stations. And at first when that was what was recommended to me, I'm like, what do you mean? You want me to go spend money and not even at a BART station? You know, that's such me with my manager hat on. But they were right. What we did was we went into the community to already establish, you know, marketplaces or where people gather and even like have cultural events. And that was extremely effective and really interesting trend. Matriarchs, grandmothers came up and said, how can we help? Left us their phone numbers, especially like faith-based groups, women, older women from faith-based groups wanted to help. And then all of a sudden we started to get the schools calling, but people started to hear about it and then they wanted to be involved. And that's when you know it's working. So just really lean into meeting people where they're at and being inclusive. And like I said, we paid several community-based organizations from the beginning. And that's what gave us that credibility and that access to real people and not just BART riders. And that's what helped us make us not sound just like a stuffy transit system trying to roll out a new initiative.
Yeah.
Thank
I think
you
people
both.
can pick up on like genuine intent, and it goes a long way to demonstrate that you care.
Okay, so we're almost at the end, but I want to sort of end with a question directed to Romana. So Romana, as a public transport researcher, you have shown that there is a negative relationship between having experienced harassment in youth and public transport perceived safety, even after adopting precautionary measures. So as we are in this society thinking about sustainable transport, the shift between, from this single occupant car to public transport, do you think, what are the chances of these people actually continuing public transport in the future? And how can we actually rectify the situation so that ridership maintains to be strong and inclusive?
I think environment plays a role in our travel behavior a lot. As a parent, I think when I'm using public transport a lot, my daughter also travel with me in public transport. But I have also realized she prefers to travel with car than the public transport because the public transport is not as comfortable as it is with the car. She might be young to understand the safety issue, but as a teenager, if she will experience such type of harassment, probably when she'll grow up, she will go to the age of getting a driving license. She will adopt to car. So preventing them at the very young age is really important. That's why I think in my slide, I've also recommended to give some type of awareness campaign in the school. So what Alicia showed, that type of campaign would be very useful also with the schoolgirls and including all the schools to promote this type of awareness campaigns, to promote more sustainable mode can actually help these young girls to use public transport in the future. I know technology has improved a lot. We have better CCTVs, we have better technologies, but still our study showed that presence of human bodies are more secure than having a CCTV, on top of your head. So I think this is a very hard question to answer in one sentence. Yeah, but I believe that also the research shows that your travel pattern at the younger age actually decides what you're going to do in your adulthood. So we have to create a safer space for our younger girls so that they can actually continue with public transport or any other mode. One person was asking about first and last mile safety issues. We also had a recent research on that where we created a new safety audit tool. So it's not only about the public transport, but it also accessing to public transport. So we have to make it safe comprehensively, not only focusing on one area. Yeah, and
I think that's a wonderful note to conclude. I just want to again thank all the participants for joining us and for all the questions that you have in the chat box. And I hope you've enjoyed the presentations as much as I have. Again, a reminder that the Webinar is recorded and will be available at the PTRC website. So the link has been shared in the chat box. So thank you again. Stay safe wherever you are in the world. And we will continue work in this area. It's a very important area. Thank you again. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.